Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
And welcome to this week's episode of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. Today, we're going to be talking with a gentleman who lives in New York, but he has been abroad in France, where he has been teaching English and also being a stand-up comedian. And he has some interesting insights on human behavior. We're also going to talk about human behavior after that segment and the question of the day. So just stay tuned for us. We'll be right back with the interview. And welcome back. Today, we are being joined by Michael Hisler, who is with us from New York right now and has spent the last 3 years in France teaching English and also as a hobbyist stand-up comedian. Hi, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you doing?
Oh, not bad. Not bad. The weather here is getting cold. Is it getting cold there for you?
Yeah, we're starting to get into fall season. Starting to get, you could feel winter slowly coming up around the corner.
All right. Oh, yeah, I know it. It's that time of year. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mentioned what you were doing. Tell us a little bit more about that, especially the comedian part.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for the past 4 years, I had been living in France, and it was my first time really living outside of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was doing over there is I was focusing on trying to learn French and as well as teaching English. So I was teaching English first with children, and then like picking them up from school, going to their homes and teaching them just conversational English.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly I built up from there and I started working at language schools
Okay.
and working with university students. And then towards the end of my time there, I transitioned into where I was working with businesses and corporations, like focusing on presentations and negotiations in English. So I was doing lots of public speaking at the time. And then what's starting to become big in Europe is it's stand-up comedy, but performing stand-up comedy in different languages. So performing stand-up comedy in English, like the language crossover comedy, is starting to become
Okay.
pretty big now in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the city that I was staying in, which is Toulouse, so kind of like I think it's the fourth largest city in France, kind of in the south.
Mm-hmm.
There was one day where they kind of said that they were going to start doing stand up in English. And the person who was hosting the event knew that I was from New York and that I was giving lots of public presentations. So he just kind of hit me up on Facebook and said, "Hey, do you want to join in for the first stand up event in English?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do that."
Had you had any comedy experience prior to that?
No, besides from being a Jew from New York, I think that was the extent of my.
Oh.
People just assumed that I qualified, I guess, but I
Okay.
didn't have any experience like either acting or performing on stage outside of just like giving presentations, teaching English.
And so you just jumped.
Yeah, exactly. It was like so when the opportunity came up, I'm like, you know what? Let me give this a shot. And I've always wanted to do it. I was always big into comedy,
Mm-hmm.
especially as it relates to languages and culture. So even as I was teaching in France, I was constantly just writing down jokes uh, to myself as just little like just little differences I was noticing between cultures, as it relates to like the workplace. So how people would act socially in France versus how people would act socially in the US, and then also differences of expressions and languages. So I was constantly writing those things down.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, when they offered me the opportunity, I'm like, yeah, sure. Let me give that a shot. Let me try jumping into this.
Okay. And when we talked previously, you said that you thought it was going to just be a simple open mic, but tell us what happened.
Yeah. So my understanding of the time, and probably like something that kind of encouraged my willingness to give it a shot, is I'm like, okay, it sounds like it's going to be an open mic in English. I'm sure open mics happen all the time.
Uh-huh.
I've I've been doing some public speaking. Like I'm pretty good at this. Let me try seeing if I can give it a shot in comedy. So I said, "Yep, let me give this a shot." And then about a week before the event was supposed to take place, I walked by the what I thought was just going to be like the small bar where the comedy is going to be taking place, and I noticed there was like this huge poster with 5 pictures plastered on it. Like my picture was like second to the left, and on top it says like introducing international comedians performing in English for the first time in Toulouse. We have a Jewish American from New York, and I'm just looking there, and I'm like, holy crap! It
That's
might
funny.
be time for me to actually start focusing on this set. And like my nerves just shut up at that point.
But you did it anyway.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, I mean, that's probably been kind of my MO in life, that
Uh-huh.
I'm always like, should I take this risk? Should I not take this risk? And I'm like, screw it. How bad can it be? The answer is really bad. But I was like, you know what? Let me just jump in and give it a shot. Like I already agreed, like my face is on the poster already. Like, let me just jump in and see what happens. So that's when I try to I took out time and started trying to consolidate all my jokes into like it was going to be a 10-minute set,
Yeah, oh, that's a
and I
lot. And
started
that's
yeah, and that's what I realized, like, because I really didn't have that much information about stand-up comedy at the time in terms of performing. And that's like you mentioned yesterday, because initially when you get started in doing an open mic, it can be like a 3-minute set or a 5-minute set.
right.
Yeah, a 10-minute set can be like a significant amount of time. Um, so I just started, I'm like, but I think I was kind of naive about the whole process, which
Uh-huh.
I think was probably a blessing for me, uh, because I didn't really have that much expectations of how could the whole thing turn out.
Hmm.
So I just kind of consolidated to a 10-minute set, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm good now. I think I'll be ready for
How'd it go?
it. So it was yeah, let's just say it's a good thing that I was really so innocent at the time. Because I didn't really like I practiced preparing everything like the morning that I was gonna start give like the morning that I was supposed to present my 10 minutes and do the open mic.
Hmm.
So I practiced it then. I'm like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. Like I'm sure I've said these jokes to friends and they've laughed. I'm like, this will be great. So before my set, maybe like 45 minutes before my set, I went over to a friend of mine and I just did the entire 10-minute set in front of him.
Uh-huh.
Um, he didn't laugh one time. He did not laugh one time. And
Oh
at
no.
that point, that's when the pressure is starting to get to me, because I'm like, oh God, like this is gonna be a disaster. Why did I agree to do this? But I'm like, you know what? You agreed to it, so just finish it off and see what happens. So then I start walking towards the theater,
Hmm.
and I'm already getting nervous as I'm walking there. Like, I know I told you this yesterday, but it's really true. It's like I got the same sensation I got when I was walking up to read from the Torah at my bar mitzvah.
Uh-huh.
Like like just nervous. And by the way, my bar mitzvah I completely failed. I
Oh
got
no.
like halfway through reading of the Torah and then I just bailed. That's a true
Oh,
story, by the way. Like I got halfway through reading of the Torah, and then I'm just like, "Ooh," like I didn't remember the next parts, the next lines that I was supposed to have memorized. So I was
uh-huh.
just like, "Ooh, I have a headache. I got to sit this one out." And everyone's like, "Okay, sit down, sit down." And I was like, "Ooh," but I kind of remember I viewed that as like a failure, and I started getting that same sensation when I was walking towards, like when I was walking in the direction of the theater.
Uh-huh.
And then when I get into the theater, first they take me into, I never been inside the theater. So I assumed it was going to be a small thing. First, they take me into the main theater where there's like 400 seats. And I'm just there. And I start seeing the other comedians and they're practicing their lines. And I start recognizing them.
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm like, okay, this is like a local French comedian that I knew about in Toulouse. And when they say it's the first time in English, they mean they're taking these experienced comics and they're now going to be performing in English for the first time. So at this point, like panic is really starting to set in. And
Oh
then
my.
they gradually take me up to like the actors' dressing room, which
Yeah.
I had only seen in movies and things like that. And like you walk into this room, it's actually really nice to have a ton of chocolate and like soda that you can like take as much as you want. But I wasn't thinking about that at all. And at this point, I'm getting like now is where I'm getting close to like shitting my pants time. Now we're starting to reach that point where I'm like, what did I do? Because I see the theater, I see the whole thing. And then thankfully someone comes into me and they're like, yeah, we'll be performing in the smaller theater, which was like a small theater attached to the large one and was just like 50 people
Nice.
in it. So I was
That's a
like, oh,
relief, right?
yeah. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And the entire time, like I am faking the entire time because I'm there with people who have been performing comedy for like minimum of 2 years, have done
Uh-huh.
it in French, they've been performing all over. And I'm also there as like the token Jewish American from New York performing in English. So everyone's like, this guy, he's gonna be great. And I'm just there and I was like, what did I get myself into?
Oh man.
Um, yeah, plus my entire set had just bombed when I was performing for my friend like 45 minutes before this whole thing.
Right.
uh yeah, but I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna power through and we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Awesome. And
Yeah,
I understand that it was moderately successful.
yeah, so the set, it actually went extremely well, because they did the same thing. Like there's maybe 50 people packed into a smaller theater.
Hmm.
Um, for my intro music, I gave them like this Hebrew song to play.
Uh-huh.
And once they called my name and I got up on set, I don't know why, but I just started dancing. Um, Spoiler alert, I'm not a talented dancer at all. I struggle to do the hora, but sometimes I can complete that successfully. Um, I just started dancing and just like danced for like 2 minutes and people started clapping. And then to cut the music, I remember I turned around and I smacked my butt in the direction of the people who were like playing the music. And then
Yeah.
they just cut it off right then. And I'm like, okay, perfect. And then my opening line is I just turned to this crowd of 50 people who had just seen me seriously embarrass myself with my dancing moves. And I turned to them and just the first thing is I say, so I'm Jewish, which was the opening line. And the second that I say, so I'm Jewish, some guy in the left corner just started laughing.
Uh-huh.
And once it happened, I got so happy. I just started like that because that helped me relax a lot. And I was just like, motherfucker, I didn't even get to the joke yet. And then like from there and like with the energy from the crowd and everything, it just started building and building and building. And yeah, like the first set, it went really well. And then after I finished my first set, people were coming over to me and they asked me, because again, like Jewish American from New York, and they come over to me and they're like, are you related to Jerry Seinfeld?
Oh no, are you?
And I'm like, yes, I am. Of course I am.
Of
And the
course.
next thing you know, like all these offers started just rolling in.
Oh man. That is hilarious. That is hilarious. So, you know, we talked a little bit about the format for my show here, and the topic is what drives you. And you gave us a lot of information about things that you've done. What do you think is the passion part of that? That you just went for something. You just you went to teach English in France. You sort of have this sort of adventuresome spirit. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Would you consider that to be the passion piece, or what do you think is the driving what drives you, Mike?
Um, that's a good question. I think what drives me, it's probably two things that drive me.
Hmm.
The first thing is I'm just extremely passionate about experiencing as many things as I can in my life. Like, because I really believe, and I know it's a cliche, and I know people say these things all the time, but I truly believe that, like, that's that's the reason why we're here. Because we're all given X amount of years to be on this earth, right?
Yeah,
Then at
yeah.
a certain point, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you come from, how much money you've made, like any of that stuff. Then like time's up. And then whatever happens afterwards is debatable.
Right.
Depends depends on which things you believe in or don't believe in. I don't know. It gets confusing. I just focus on like what I can concentrate on now. So part of the drive is like we have a limited amount of time to do things,
Hmm.
right? And within that time, it's find whatever works for you and just go for it. And for me, one of my passions is just experiencing as much as I can, right? So that'll be why I'll probably just take these if ever there's an adventure. Although as I grow older, I've been slowing down exactly how
Yeah, one
how
tends to do
adventurous I
that.
can become. Yeah, exactly. It's like this whole maturation process that I've been told about. Um, so that's part of the passion, just a desire to experience everything. And then a second thing that drives me is I like to. I'm fascinated by human behavior and specifically how we as humans communicate with each other
Uh-huh. Yeah, you mentioned.
outside. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, and when I say that, I'm talking about outside of even verbally. Like, what messages are we giving off to each other based on our language, based on our culture, based on our tone, based on our facial cues? Because I believe that so much of communication stems from things that we're not even aware of, like ways of communicating that we're not even aware of exist.
Yeah. Yeah, you are correct. We go through life communicating all kinds of things and aren't really paying attention.
And then part of the thing that also drives this is because as we spoke about yesterday, is I grew up in a unless Orthodox religious community, and I was actually studying to be a rabbi, doing intensive studies to be a rabbi for 4 years. So from
Hmm.
ages 18 to 22, I was studying 16 hours per day, 6 days per week, studying the Talmud, studying ethical works, all of these different things. And then when I was 22, I moved to New York and I decided to pursue like other interests outside of the rabbinate. And it was an interesting experience for me because when you grow up in a religious with a religious background and in a religious community, it's very similar to traveling to a different country when you decide to leave
Yes.
that community. And in order for me to kind of adjust into that community, into like American society, it required lots of the times for me just to kind of shut up and observe everything.
Uh-huh.
Like it felt like I was an actor in a play where I didn't understand what the boundaries were. I didn't understand what the rules were. So initially, I just kind of had to just be quiet and just observe.
Right.
And when you take the time to just observe things, you begin to realize, well, outside of you begin to realize how creepy you look. The second thing is that you start to realize when people say, "Why are you staring at me so intently like that?
Yeah,
It's creepy. I'm going to call the cops."
yeah,
Um, the second thing is like you realize how much is being communicated through through nonverbal communication. So
hmm
through our hand gestures, facial gestures, what we're trying to say, like everything. You just begin to notice there's an entire wealth of knowledge and communication that's existing outside of just the groundwork verbal communication, which we tend to think is what is like the foundation of human conversation and interaction.
yeah, yeah. That, that's a good point. We spend a lot of time focusing on the spoken words and don't really rely on the other things that we do to an extent, but we sort of have a love-hate relationship with that nonverbal stuff, maybe not love hate, but it's more of a conscious unconscious. We've got, and the more technologically driven we get, the less we pay attention to these things, you know which is sort of an interesting phenomenon. But
Yeah,
you
it's
know you mentioned that when you were doing stand up in France, that you saw some interesting differences or ways of communicating that you weren't used to. Can you give us an example or tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah, sure. Well, actually, stand up provided a great way for me to explore this nonverbal communication that I was talking about.
Hmm.
Um, because, for example, depending on the crowd, so I was playing in France, primarily in France, but I was in my audience, it was always a mixture of different cultures that would be there. So sometimes it could be a purely expat crowd, so coming from all over Europe or from the US as well. Other times it could be purely a French crowd. And as I started this journey of exploring, as I started this stand-up journey, I began to realize the differences that would occur based on the crowd that I was performing to, based on
Hmm.
who the audience was. Um, so, for example, out of my entire stand-up, there was I have one joke that was guaranteed to work every single time. I didn't even think of the joke. It was my friend who told it to me, maybe like 30 minutes, same thing, like 30 minutes before I was about to head out on a set. Like he
Uh,
told me like the basis of it. And I like afterwards I kind of crafted it and kind of made it like I like added some whatever theatric flair to it or just extended it a little bit to kind of just get the most reaction out of it. But this joke, this joke is like guaranteed to work. If ever I'm having a terrible night, if I'm trying out new material, I just know, just pull out this joke, people will laugh.
yeah.
And there was one time when I was performing, I think I was like the third comic on, and I noticed that the crowd wasn't very responsive. Um, but I'm like, whatever, I'll give it a shot. So I get up there and I start performing my routine, and I'm not really getting a reaction. And I continue performing, nothing. I'm like, oh, okay, if this joke doesn't work, then like the universe is just not aligned today. Like something like day is night, night is day, like something like that.
Uh,
And like I performed the joke, and because the set, like I wouldn't say it bombed, it just wasn't getting like, it was getting like small polite laughter.
yeah, yeah.
So I threw myself into this. It takes maybe about like a minute and a half to set up. And like I threw myself into this joke, because when you perform certain bits over and over again, and you can kind of do it in your sleep, sometimes you're not really that present
Yeah,
when you're
yeah, you
performing.
lose that energy behind it.
Yeah, but over here it was a challenge. So I'm like, you know what? I throw myself into this joke. Like I put myself there. I'm doing the whole. It's like I play different like characters, so I'm doing the whole thing. I'm throwing my body into it, my mind into it, and at the end, it got like same thing, like polite chuckles.
Oh
And
no.
I was like, I don't get it. I was like, I don't get it. Because I wasn't performing that much new material that night. And like
Right.
I knew the material was solid. So like why didn't it work? And then when I finished the set, afterwards, like everyone stood up and did like the golf clap. And they're like they asked for like an encore, like come back out again for like a little like 60-minute, 60-second or 2-minute like joke, like add a little bit to the end of it. And that's when I realized that, for example, stand up in France is performing American stand up in France is a relatively new phenomenon, I'd say.
Uh-huh.
Like performing stand up with the American, like caustic humor, like self deprecating, that's kind of a relatively new phenomenon in France. And they and like the because this was an entire French audience and not like in Paris where maybe they've experienced before, they reacted to a stand-up set like they would react to a play,
Yeah.
where
Okay.
it's almost considered impolite to laugh during the set.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean.
So it was kind of like from there you realize how big of a difference culture makes in terms of how people react. Because if I'm performing that set in the US and I experience the same thing, I'm heading out the door after I finished 5 minutes because I know tomatoes are about to start flying in.
Yeah.
And when you're up there and you can't really escape, you just start like having all these thoughts racing through your brain. Like, why is the set not working? Like, am
Right.
I off? Is the joke off? Like, do I need to adjust? But then sometimes it's just really recognizing the audience and how they react to jokes based on their culture or based on their experiences.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a very fascinating story that illustrates some of the stuff that I try to get across in the other parts of the podcast, because I'm always talking about uh, strange things that people see and why that may be happening, and cultural influence. I haven't really gotten into culture yet so much. I'm still working on the basics, but we're all influenced by our perceptions and our culture, and that can mean that we experience something different. The weird thing about humans is that we have a limited amount of ways that we can respond to things. We're very simple with the range of emotional responses or active responses that we can have. What makes human behavior so complex, it's the combination of these experiences and how we express those in these moments. So you talk about this joke, and you're up there and you're comparing it to what an American audience would do, and you find out that they're actually enjoying your joke. They just have a cultural influence that says they have to be polite, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
now and now also the awesome thing is that you get to change your perspective that much more, because you've added data to your data file. So
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like it's, yeah, and we spoke about this a little bit yesterday of how as human beings we're like this huge uh, oxymoronic conundrum or something.
yeah.
We're both incredibly complex but incredibly simple
yeah
at the
i
same time.
yeah, I use that term all the time. It's deceptively simple and incredibly complex, and because of the way our brain works, we try to fall onto one or the other and stick there. But yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy thing, human beings.
Yeah, and especially in terms of how we communicate with each other.
Hmm.
Because so for example, as I was saying, besides for the comedy bit, I was also working at corporations in France where I would be focusing on improving their English. So that would be conversational English, that'd be business English. And it also would involve if a French company would want to negotiate with the native English speaking company.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to notice that besides for working on getting the proper negotiation expressions correct. So, for example, if you disagree with someone because you think their idea is stupid, if you just say, your idea is stupid, they won't accept that. But if you say, I understand where you're coming from, but your idea is stupid, everyone's like, oh, okay, he
Yeah.
understands where I'm coming from.
Yeah. That's a Dale Carnegie thing.
But it's so true. And so it's how you say things, which is extremely important as well. But then also what I noticed is there could be just a simple cultural difference that could set the entire tone for a negotiation between between a French company and a native English speaking company from the US.
Mhm.
For example, in France, there's a huge emphasis on being polite, like a
Right.
huge emphasis on being polite.
Right.
And
Not so much in America.
so if I would have yeah, well, it's different. It's like Americans, we have our own type of politeness, but it's not as formal.
Right. Yeah, you're correct. It's a very informal.
Yeah, which is, and there's a part that's kind of nice being back in New York for a little bit, where when if you want to say hello to someone in the morning, it's but fuck you, asshole, and you're like, oh, he cares about me. Um, he called me an asshole. That's so sweet. Um, but in France, for example, so if I'd be teaching students, one thing I would notice is when they would walk into like the office that I was teaching from, they would go around to all of their colleagues, say hello, and oftentimes give like the bees, like the double kiss. But they
Yeah.
would go, there could be 20, 30 people in the station that I would be teaching from. And no matter what, they would go around and be giving the bees to every single one there.
Yeah. Yeah. Acknowledge
Because it's
everybody.
extremely polite. Yeah, exactly. It's extremely polite. Saying hello, thank you is polite. And when American companies would come in and meet with French companies, I noticed that there would be two things. One thing would be if a non-American company would come in and would speak with the French company, they would always say hello in French, right?
Mhm.
They would be saying hello and thank you, right? Like merci. They'd be saying all that in French. I noticed that Americans were the only company when they would come in, they would just either they wouldn't really start off with a hello, they would just kind of jump into their pitch,
Right.
or they would say hello, but say hello in English.
Yeah.
And when you start off by doing something like that, something small, if they would have started off the meeting just by saying like bonjour or something, that would have changed the entire tone of the meeting between these two companies, because it's really something that is just a small difference, but it's a really important socially. It shows that that your culture, your company, yourself as a person is being respected, and just something like that could have changed the entire tone of negotiations.
Yeah. 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 It's a very fascinating thing to watch people interact with each other. So, Michael, that's about all the time that we have today. I want to thank you for joining us. It was a great talk, and your experiences show us a lot of different ways of interacting. Do you have any quick final thoughts?
Quick final thoughts. Not that much, other than I'm just going to be following your podcast religiously now. The
Oh,
topic is really interesting.
well,
I started listening to some of the other um, people that you've interviewed, and yeah, I really like, you have a very calming, understanding influence as the podcaster. So yeah, I really enjoyed this experience, and thank you very much.
oh, well, thank you for that. So good luck. I don't know what your future holds. I hope it's going to be more comedy. You know, I have a personal investment there too. I tried that once. Didn't really work out for me. But keep in touch. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right. So that's it for today. We will see you back here in a few minutes, where we're going to head into the topic for the day. Thank you for joining us as well, and see you in a few. And thanks again for joining us. Over the past several weeks, 7 weeks, I have been talking about the our internal structures, if you will, that create our what basically culminates into our behavior, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And when I'm talking about that internal structure, I'm not talking about all the complexities. I've basically given some broad brushstrokes of a lot of different layers of what goes on inside of us when we are going through our daily life, all the way from the very most primitive decision-making system, which is that pleasure pain center, all the way up to emotions and feelings and beliefs and things like that. So what does all this do? All this internal processing uh, comes out in in our external world, the way that we move through life. That's our behavior. Behavior is anything that we can see people doing, and it's the external reflection of our internal world. That's what behavior is. It is how we interact with each other. It is how we diagnose people. It is how we uh, catch serial killers. It's how we date. It's how we do interviews. It's how we buy a cup of coffee or laugh at a joke. This is the fascinating piece. I think is that when we can understand what is causing the ripples on the surface, we can fully gauge more of that person. And there's so much to the world around us that is expressed through human behavior that we've come to take for granted. And I've said this several times throughout the program, um, where we tend to look at what somebody's doing and we automatically make a snap judgment about that person, and we put a label on that person instead of wondering what is the steps that created this behavior. You know, the very first episode, I talked about all the riots and all the things that are going on right now because of all this crazy stuff. And here we are in November when we're gearing up for the holiday season, and we have the election is come and gone, and we're still having the fallout from that. And now we have the new shutdowns. Everything is being shut down again, and we're getting anxious again. In fact, I went to Costco just yesterday, which was a big mistake, because when I got there, the parking lot was, and this was in the morning. This was when the typical time where nothing's going on, the place was packed. And as I was walking to the door, all these people were coming out with, what do you think? Toilet paper, sanitizer, masks. So everybody has had this fresh wave of fear come through them because of these proclamations, and they are behaving in a way that seems fairly odd. They're hoarding things, which is very typical of how that works. So I turned around and walked out and got in my car and went home, and then came back later that night, and lo and behold, everything that I mentioned was out of stock. Not that I was trying to get toilet paper, but uh, the toilet paper, paper towels, sanitizer, bleach wipes, masks, all the things that we have been worried about, or basically all the things that have been in the news and we've gotten used to not doing anymore, we've gone back to hoarding. And this is a behavior, and it's directly related to our anxiety levels as a society. And this is the thing about why, when we're looking at behavior, it behooves us to stop what we are thinking for a moment and try to understand the context. And the context is what's going on in that situation, around that situation, things like that. And we typically don't do that kind of stuff. We typically just look at what's going on and make a snap judgment. We do it all the time. Again, and I said this in one of the past episodes, it's that heuristic part of our brain that makes those snap judgments so that we can move on from our day. It's easier for me to say, well, that was a stupid thing for that person to do, or that was a stupid person, and then I can forget about it and move on. We express ourselves through this process. Our internal world is expressed through our behavior. And it's not just what I'm doing right this second, it's behavior over time. It's what I do in the morning when I wake up. That's a behavior. It's what I do uh, when I meet a woman and I want to date her, or it's how I behave at work, at my desk, when the boss is not there or when the boss is there. And there's a lot of commonalities between human beings when it comes to this. Uh, the most interesting thing about human beings that I think is that we are incredibly complex yet very simple, meaning we have a very limited range of things that we can express emotion wise, behavior wise at any given moment. We just don't have a very large range of stuff to express the internal workings. What makes it very complex, however, is the combinations and the frequency of those small variable ranges. If you've ever watched somebody who is rapidly cycling through emotional states, you know what I mean. And it's the same thing with people who are delusional or people who are high. They are still expressing themselves through that limited means, but the combination of how they express themselves makes it complex. And on the back end, the one of the most interesting things is that behavior is the very thing that we can affect the most readily. In real time, we can affect what we are doing. And in turn, it affects the things that we're thinking and the things that we're feeling. It's a power play sometimes, but it works. We can behave as if we are confident. And if we do it for a long enough period of time, we will feel that our emotions or our thoughts will start to gauge that direction. Now, this is all short-term stuff. I don't know if you know who Amy Cuddy is, but she studied this type of behavior, which has become known as the superhero pose. Now, it's basically uh, alpha behavior is what it really comes down to. Is it's behavior that shows a strength and confidence. And what she tested was it affects the chemical responses that we're having in our body. So what she found through her experiments was that when we hold what's called a superhero pose for 2 minutes or longer, it increases the testosterone in our bloodstream and decreases the cortisol in our bloodstream. And that's a very significant thing. Now this is by far not the first time somebody has done this. This has been around for a while, about how physiology affects temperament or emotional state. But she actually showed the biological response there, which makes sense, because when you are confident, you are able to take more risks, and you also don't have your stress hormone in the system mucking things up, or as much of the stress hormone, which is cortisol. So we see this interplay between the mind and the body. And oftentimes we don't think about that kind of thing when we're going out and doing things. And we definitely don't do that when we think about getting out of our heads and doing things for ourselves. Or I don't know if you've ever thought about getting a new job and how it seemed that was a difficult process to go through, or maybe it was easy for you. It depends on your personality. It depends on that internal world. Again, the internal world is reflected by our external activities. So what these 8 weeks have boiled down into, for me anyway, is that when you see people doing things, don't let your brain do what it does. Just take a moment and look at the context. Look at what's going on. And you might not see a crazy person stacked to the gills with toilet paper because they think the end of the world's coming. You may see somebody who's just afraid, which is what we kind of all are. Even if we don't want to admit it, we are afraid of what's going on because this is not something we are certain of. There's so much uncertainty going on right now that it's generating, it is poking the primal instinct more than normal. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Stick around. We'll be right back with the question of the day. And welcome back. Today's question of the day comes to us from Mark from, where did that go? Mark from Minneapolis. And he asked the question, why do I buy a gym membership and then not go? And that's pretty appropriate since we're heading towards the first of the year, and that's typically when we do resolutions, and that's one of the resolutions that we do. Well, again, take a moment. I bet you all, if you've been following the podcast, you can figure out what I'm fixing to say. Because the bottom line is, again, some of the stuff that we do is very simple. Why do we pay for a gym membership that we don't use? Well, for one, we start because we need to do something, and so we have a logical reason to do it. If we're motivated enough, meaning if we have enough emotional response around it, we will go to the gym. And typically you see people who go to the gym for maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks, and then they fall off, and then they don't go back, but yet they continue to pay for it. So here's the process, right? You know that you need to do something, and you might feel that you need to do it, so you do it. And that's the behavior of that pain situation in that moment. And at first you might be pretty excited, or at least have enough energy to follow through with that decision because you've made a financial commitment to that at the very least. So you go to the gym. And if anybody here has gone long time without being in the gym, you go to the gym and you find out, wow, this sucks. This doesn't make me feel good at all. I'm tired. There's a lot of pain involved in going to the gym. But we are committed at least for a while. So we push. And then after a while, it comes down to this. It's time for me to go to the gym. I'm sitting in my comfy chair. What's more important to me right now? Because to get up, to go to the gym, I have to knowingly experience some pain. Not only because I know that going to the gym is going to be hard, but I'm also going to experience pain from having to get up from my comfy chair. And so what do I do? What is it that I want to do? I want to avoid pain and seek out pleasure. Well, I'm already in pleasure right there in my chair. And getting up and going to the gym is painful. And what this boils down to is what's called activation energy. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's the amount of energy you need to generate in order to overcome that process to get yourself out of the chair, into your clothes, and out the door. And if you can get yourself to the gym, more than likely you will hit your routine and get into whatever it is that you do at the gym, and you will go through it no problem. But that's where the sliding starts. You do it one day where you don't go to the gym, and then the next day when you are faced with the choice again, it's easier for you not to do it. Because why? Well, you have established that it's painful to go. You're also establishing a reward system. If you don't go, you get to stay in your chair and eat chips or watch TV or whatever you do. And then you start establishing a belief system because of all that input that belief system may, well, it doesn't work anyway. Or, I don't know, whatever you tell yourself, why you didn't go. Well, I'm just too tired today. Well, I have to take care of my kids. Well, so we unprioritize it. Prioritizing is simply placing energy around an activity or task. That's all really prioritizing do, is that I'm going to value this task above any other task, and I'm going to put my energy here. And so if you think about it, a lot of the things that we do from day to day, we take energy from ourselves and place it in this thing. So if you've ever heard of the spoon theory, you might understand that a little bit. That's one way of looking at it. So we get into the habit of not going. Why do we keep paying for it? Well, because that piece of our brain says, well, it's good for me. And if I can ever get time to go, I won't have to commit that money again. I won't have to go through that pain of committing that money again. So it's easier for me to just leave it there and let that money go out every month because it's easy. The funny thing about a lot of the stuff that we do is that it's easy to do or it's easier not to do, depending on how we feel about it. So there you go, Mark. That's why. So I would encourage you to stop payment or put that energy around that task and go. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to me today. That is the end of our, what is this, episode 8. And again, if you have questions, please send them to me. I love answering these questions. It's sometimes I get asked a question that I have to really dig into and really kind of figure out. But if you have any questions, please write to me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net, and it might be on a future episode. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Bye-bye.